On August 24, 2023, Japan began releasing more than 1.3 million tons of treated nuclear wastewater into the Pacific, a process that could take 40 years to complete. Officials say the water is safe, yet inside each drop lingers radioactive tritium that even state-of-the-art technology cannot remove. The science is contentious, communities are anxious, and the currents connect far beyond Japan's shores. Has a desperate solution solved Fukushima's crisis or opened a new chapter of global uncertainty? In March 2011, a magnitude 9 earthquake struck off Japan's northeast coast. The tsunami that followed overwhelmed the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, flooding 3 reactor buildings and knocking out power to critical cooling systems. As the reactor cores overheated, emergency workers pumped in massive amounts of water to prevent catastrophic melt-through. That water, after coming into direct contact with damaged nuclear fuel, became heavily contaminated with radioactive materials such as cesium-137, strontium-90, and tritium. Every day, new groundwater and rain seeped into the crippled plant, mixing with radioactive debris. By the end of the first year, tens of thousands of tons of contaminated water had pooled in the basements. With nowhere else to put it, the Tokyo Electric Power Company, known as TEPCO, began constructing an array of steel storage tanks across the site. Over the next decade, the tank farm grew to more than 1,000 units, each standing several stories tall and holding up to 1,000 tons. By 2023, the total volume had swelled to approximately 1.3 million tons, enough to fill 500 Olympic swimming pools. Despite efforts to divert groundwater and reduce inflow, the plant continued to generate an estimated 80,000 to 100,000 tons of contaminated water each year. Space on the site was running out. The tanks, exposed to salt air and seismic risk, were never meant to last indefinitely. TEPCO faced a mounting dilemma. The sheer volume and aging infrastructure threatened both on-site safety and the timeline for decommissioning. The question was no longer if a solution was needed, but how to manage a legacy of radioactive water that kept growing with every passing season. Engineers at Tokyo Electric Power Company, known as TEPCO, faced a technical challenge with no easy answers. They had to safely manage more than 1 million tons of water contaminated by the Fukushima disaster. The solution centered on the Advanced Liquid Processing System, ALPS, a sprawling array of treatment columns designed to strip out 62 radioactive elements from the water. Cesium and strontium, both dangerous and persistent, are reduced to undetectable levels after multiple passes through the system. But tritium remains. Chemically identical to ordinary water, tritium cannot be filtered out using any available technology. Its weak radiation makes it less hazardous than other isotopes, but its presence still demands careful control. In August 2023, TEPCO began the first phase of ocean discharge. The initial batch, about 7,800 tons, was released over 17 days. Each liter was diluted with at least 700 parts of clean seawater before entering a purpose-built undersea tunnel. The goal was to keep tritium concentrations well below Japan's regulatory limit of 1,500 becquerels per liter, with actual samples measuring between 200 and 284. For context, the World Health Organization guideline for drinking water stands at 10,000 becquerels per liter. The discharge tunnel stretches 1 kilometer offshore, releasing the diluted water at a depth of 30 to 50 meters, where ocean currents help disperse it further. TEPCO publishes monitoring data for every batch, detailing tritium levels and confirming compliance with national standards. The entire process is designed to unfold gradually, with the full release scheduled to span 30 to 40 years, a long-term commitment that locks in the chosen path for decades to come. International scrutiny intensified as Japan prepared to release treated Fukushima water into the Pacific Ocean. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, dispatched a team of experts to audit every stage of the process, including sampling, analysis, and dilution. Their 2023 report concluded that Japan's discharge plan was consistent with global nuclear safety standards, calling the radiological impact on people and the environment negligible. The IAEA review extended beyond paperwork. Inspectors conducted on-site sampling, cross-checked laboratory results, and compared Japan's approach to practices at other nuclear facilities worldwide. In France, the La Hague reprocessing plant released 11,400 terabecquerels of tritium into the English Channel in 2018 alone, hundreds of times more than Fukushima's planned annual discharge of 22 terabecquerels. Similar releases occur at nuclear plants in Canada, the United States, and South Korea, typically drawing little international attention. The difference at Fukushima lies not in the volume, but in the context: a post-disaster site, a legacy of mistrust, and a public still scarred by TEPCO's earlier failures. For example, in 2014, TEPCO revised its reported strontium-90 levels in groundwater upward from 900,000 to 5 million becquerels per liter, fueling skepticism about the company's transparency and technical competence. TEPCO now publishes batch-by-batch tritium data for every discharge, and the IAEA hosts real-time monitoring dashboards for independent verification. Yet even as international regulators endorse the safety of the release, a gap remains between scientific assurance and public confidence. For many, the memory of past underreporting and the sheer scale of the operation keep doubts alive, regardless of the numbers or the authority behind them. China's government announced a total ban on Japanese seafood imports within hours of the first treated water release in August 2023. Cargo containers were left stranded at ports in Shanghai and Dalian. By the end of that month, Japan's seafood exports to China had fallen by over 95%. South Korea and several Pacific Island nations imposed their own restrictions, citing uncertainty over long-term ecological effects. The economic shock rippled through Japan's coastal prefectures, with Fukushima's fishing cooperatives reporting sales declines of 20 to 46% in the final quarter of 2023. At the Soma port, crates of flounder and sea bass sat unsold on the docks, despite passing every radiation screening. For many families, the collapse of Chinese demand erased years of slow recovery since the 2011 disaster. Fishermen and wholesalers described a wave of canceled contracts and falling prices, not just for Fukushima catch, but for seafood from Hokkaido to Kyushu. Nationally, Japan's aquatic exports dropped by about 10% in 2023, with the hardest-hit regions clustered along the Tohoku coast. The Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries scrambled to find new buyers in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. But the gap left by China's annual market of $150 million proved impossible to fill overnight. Protests erupted in fishing towns across northern Japan, with banners reading "Our Ocean, Our Future," and calls for government compensation. Regional governments demanded independent monitoring and greater transparency from TEPCO and the central authorities. In Tokyo, lawmakers debated emergency relief packages, while opposition parties accused the government of sacrificing rural livelihoods for expedience. The rift between scientific assurances and economic reality deepened, as community leaders warned that trust, once lost, would be slow to return. The fallout extended beyond economics. It became a test of public faith in science, diplomacy, and the promises of those in power. Oceanographers tracked the movement of Fukushima's treated water using a network of sampling stations and sophisticated computer models. As the diluted water leaves the undersea tunnel, it enters the Kuroshio Current, a powerful flow that sweeps northeast along Japan's coast, before veering east into the Pacific. Simulations predict an elongated plume stretching eastward, thinning as it travels. Most of the tritium disperses within the first few hundred kilometers, with concentrations dropping sharply below background levels as it mixes into the vast ocean. Empirical seawater samples collected from both Japanese and international monitoring cruises show no sustained rise in tritium beyond the immediate vicinity of the discharge point. These findings align closely with model projections, offering a data-driven picture of rapid dilution and wide dispersal. The evidence base for risk assessment is built on the agreement between modeled pathways and real-world measurements. No proven technology exists to remove tritium from such massive volumes of water. The leading methods, catalytic exchange and vacuum distillation, work for concentrated heavy water, but not for the diluted light water stored at Fukushima. Scaling these methods up would require decades. It would cost hundreds of billions, and it would consume more energy than the plant itself could ever provide. Policy analysts point out that even if the money and time were available, no facility anywhere has handled 1 million tons of treated water. The International Atomic Energy Agency and Japanese expert panels have repeatedly concluded that removal is technically and economically unfeasible at this scale. Meanwhile, critical data on organically bound tritium in marine life remains sparse, leaving open questions about long-term ecological impacts. The decision to proceed with ocean release sets a global precedent, one shaped as much by technological limits as by policy choices. As the world watches Japan's decades-long release, Every new data point becomes a test of trust between science, industry, and public fear. This is not just about one coastline, it is a live experiment with global stakes. The ocean remembers what we put in long after headlines move on.